Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into an absolutely incredible true story straight from our source material. We're looking at the journey of a scientist who didn't just push the boundaries of physics, but actually had to overcome massive, systemic hurdles just to be allowed in the room. We're talking about the life and, honestly, the sheer brilliant mind of C.V. Raman, a man who would eventually go on to secure Asia's very first Nobel Prize in physics.
Now, this explainer is fundamentally a classic David versus Goliath tale. On one side, you have the established, heavily restrictive rules of the colonial academic system, and on the other, an absolute genius. So how exactly does a teenager, armed with literally nothing but his intellect and relentless curiosity, manage to navigate and ultimately outsmart the entrenched British scientific establishment? Let's get into it.
Section 1. A Prodigy is Born. The Early Years.
C.V. Raman, or Chandrasekhara Venkata Raman, was born in 1888 in Tiruchirappalli, Tamil Nadu, to a father who actually taught physics and math, so he was steeped in science from day one. And his academic timeline, it's just completely mind-blowing. At just 11 years old, he passed his 10th grade exams. By 13, he was entirely done with 12th grade. At the age of 16, when, most kids today are just figuring out how to parallel park, Raman graduated college, and he didn't just graduate, he snagged a gold medal in physics. By 18, he had completed his post-graduation with the highest marks possible. So yeah, he was an undeniable prodigy, and he was completely ready to conquer the world of science.
Section 2. The Colonial Science Barrier, Facing Systemic Roadblocks.
So, as an 18-year-old student, Raman started experimenting with new ways to measure surface tension. He really believed he could improve upon the existing methods. But when he approached his British instructor, Professor Jones, with a brand new idea and a research paper he'd written, the professor hadn't even bothered to read it. When Raman reminded him, Professor Jones just laughed it off and delivered this crushing line, "It is of no use, do not waste time here." He basically told Raman to drop the research entirely. Think about how students today might feel when their curious, passionate questions are just completely shut down by a teacher. That's exactly where Raman found himself.
And this perfectly illustrates the catch-22 of the colonial gatekeeping that threatened to silence his scientific voice completely. As our source points out, if a scientist wants to share their work with the world, they have to publish it in a scientific journal to be verified by experts. But India, at that specific time, didn't have a single scientific journal of its own. So Raman's only real option was to publish abroad. But the British professors actively blocked Indian research from leaving the country. So no local journals and no permission to publish internationally. It was a complete dead end.
Section 3. The Teenage Published Scientist Bypassing the Gatekeepers.
But hey, you don't graduate college at 16 by giving up easily, right? Raman recognized the prejudice he was up against and decided to just go entirely behind his professor's back. Without telling his dismissive professor a single word, this 18-year-old took his research paper and submitted it directly to the British Philosophical Magazine. Because the science was rock solid, it was published without any issues. The very next year, at age 19, he published a second paper, this time on his surface tension experiment. A teenager with literally zero institutional backing was independently publishing groundbreaking physics papers on the world stage.
And what's incredibly ironic about this early success is that Raman's work caught the attention of Lord Rayleigh. If you don't know, Rayleigh was a massively famous physicist whose concepts were accepted globally. He was so impressed that he started a correspondence, sending letters of appreciation to Raman. But Rayleigh had absolutely no clue he was writing to an 18-year-old student. He totally assumed he was exchanging high-level ideas with a seasoned senior professor.
Section 4. The Accountant in the Lab, a Strategic Career Move.
Now, this early success brought a harsh realization for Raman. He knew that as his name became more famous, if he stayed an outsider in the academic system, establishment scientists would likely just take his research and publish it under their own names. He realized he couldn't beat the system from the outside. He needed resources, and he needed authority. So he made an incredibly strategic pivot. He stepped away from physics entirely and took the financial civil service exam. Unsurprisingly, he topped it. He was appointed as the Assistant Accountant General and posted in Kolkata, becoming the youngest person ever to hold this post. He was now a government accountant embedded right in the economic capital of India, surrounded by much better resources.
But an accountant who loves physics still needs a lab to do physics. Raman went looking for a place to conduct his experiments and stumbled upon the Indian Association for the Cultivation of Science, or the IACS. When he told the handlers there he wanted to do research, they were overjoyed. Why?
because 30 is the exact number of years that lab had been sitting completely empty. Literally no one had come to do research there for 3 decades.
The AICS was originally built by a nationalist named Mahendra Lal Sarkar to inspire students in science, but it had really struggled. In fact, at the time, labs usually paid researchers to conduct experiments. But the AICS had such low funds, they had to tell Raman they couldn't afford to pay him much. Raman just smiled and refused any payment at all. After finishing his long, exhausting days as an accountant, he would work nights and weekends in this lab. It was a one-man, grueling mission to elevate his country's scientific standing and earn global respect.
Section 5. The Science of Indian Music, Challenging Western Acoustics.
So Raman decided to focus his late-night research on acoustics. Specifically, he set out to analyze ancient Indian instruments. Western science at the time pretty much dictated that producing certain complex overtones, which are essentially multiple harmonious sounds ringing out from one plucked string at the exact same time, was scientifically impossible. But Raman definitively proved them wrong. He analyzed the harmonics of the veena, an ancient stringed instrument, and proved it actually did produce those impossible overtones. This proved that the ancient Indian creators of these instruments had a deeply advanced, precise understanding of acoustics. It wasn't just luck. And with this massive discovery, Raman published the first research paper out of the IASC in 30 years.
Section 6. The Unconventional Professor, the Final Roadblock.
Over time, Raman's reputation caught the attention of Calcutta University's vice-chancellor, Asutosh Mukherjee, who reached out with an offer that would finally pull Raman out of the accounting office and formally into academia. Mukherjee asked Raman to become a physics professor at the university. Interestingly enough, our source notes a great piece of historical trivia here. Raman was actually Mukherjee's second choice. He had first asked the legendary scientist Jagadish Chandra Bose, but Bose declined because he preferred to stay and research in his own private lab. So the offer went to Raman, who happily accepted. But of course, there was one final roadblock.
The British professors at the university vehemently opposed Raman's appointment. They cited strict colonial academic rules. Basically, to teach, the rules stated you must either have a PhD or have been educated abroad. Raman had neither. He didn't have a doctorate, and he was educated entirely in India. The establishment professors cited these strict regulations in a blatant attempt to block his appointment.
But Vice-Chancellor Mukherjee wasn't going to let this brilliant mind be suppressed by a technicality. He found a loophole. To instantly bypass the colonial requirement, Mukherjee utilized his power to grant Raman an honorary doctorate, a title given to respect massive contributions to a field. Just like that, boom, the barrier was dissolved. The rule was satisfied, and Raman was officially a physics professor. So after navigating dismissive teachers, 0 local journals, the constant threat of stolen work, and continuous bureaucratic roadblocks, C.V. Raman finally had it all: a lab, books, and the time to dedicate his life entirely to science. He was perfectly positioned. But this leaves us with an incredible question to ponder. With the shackles finally off, what exactly was the groundbreaking idea that he conceived, solved, and proved that would dismantle long-held global scientific beliefs and win Asia its very first Nobel Prize in physics? Well, we'll have to explore that massive discovery next time. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning everything.